you, Anil. As Anil said, I totally agree. I'm really delighted to have such powerful panelists with me in Islamabad and in Karachi. So we have already touched upon tax, whether it's direct tax or indirect tax in Islamabad, in Karachi and Lahore. But continuing with the same thing, I would like to start with my first question with Asad Ali Shah Saab, that considering 7 trillion tax collection target, what are his thoughts about the challenges the government will going to face, and how do you see that this impact various sectors like banking, real estate, etc.?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, Zishan, for that question. I think this year one major change that I see is that the tax collection target doesn't seem to be that optimistic, at least 7 trillion, considering that we have already achieved 6 trillion, or we are likely to be achieved 6 trillion. If you add expected inflation, which the government is estimating at 11.5%, but most likely it's going to overshoot there. That is a target which is more problematic. And then expected GDP of 5%. So from that perspective, I think the 7 trillion to me looks really conservative. The problem with the targeting is more on the non-tax side, especially 750 billion rupees worth of petroleum levy. That, I think this year also the collection has been very low, and it's going to be very, very surprising considering the petroleum prices that we have. I mean, at the moment there is a subsidy on petroleum, so to cut that subsidy, remove that subsidy, and then do an additional levy on that to get 750 billion, I think that is very, very challenging. That is, to me, if the petroleum prices and the super commodity inflation cycle that we are, seeing, and this Ukraine war, if all these things continue, I think that is very, very unlikely. One thing more I would like to say, I think, and I think that needs to be recognized, that this petroleum levy, by the way, is also, in my view, unconstitutional. The federal government, the parliament, under the constitution, does not have any power to levy tax on petroleum products. They have powers under the federal legislative lists only. Under the constitution, the parliament can only levy taxes, income tax, sales tax, customs, and capital value tax that are specified in the federal list. So all of the areas, all of the tax, levies that are not specified in federal list. And then there is, in this article, there is one other area, criminal law, where both parliament and the provincial assemblies can legislate. But other than that, after doing away with the concurrent list through 18th Amendment, Parliament has no power actually to levy this petroleum levy. And I think this tax on immovable property, deemed tax, which is actually a capital value tax on immovable property, it's specifically excluded through entry number 50 of the federal legislative list. Both will be problematic. I mean, in the case of this petroleum levy, somehow provinces have not really challenged it. So maybe I think they are accepting it because of the deficit, huge deficit that the federal government is facing. So they may allow it. But the thing is, then the collection of 750 billion is highly questionable.
Thank you very much, Asad sir. Coming to Dr. Nadeem sir. Sir, considering that Pakistan government is into negotiation with IMF, What challenges do you think government of Pakistan is facing while getting into an agreement with IMF? And what other challenges, once they have reached any agreement, what challenges do you think the government would be facing in running day-to-day affairs of this country?
I think Zishan Saab, the first thing that I would say is that for 75 years, 23 programs, we have done the same thing over and over again. So if I look at that, I don't see any reason to suspect that we will not have another IMF program. Whether or not it will achieve adjustment is a different matter. We will certainly have another IMF program. The IMF will agree because the IMF is also committed by moral hazard to support Pakistan. And we have used that extensively. For 75 years, we've done the same thing over and over again. And as Einstein said, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. We make the same budget every year, a tax on lights, a tax on carpets, a tax on flower vases. We have never really tried to make a coherent tax policy. With so much human capital, you accountants sitting here, I'm a little worried. Why can't we make a tax policy? Why is our tax policy a set of ad hoc measures that changes every 3 months? When you have that kind of a policy, who the hell will invest here? I personally myself am looking for the exit door, and I know lots of people who stuff their drawers full of dollars, and that's probably the only way.
Zishan, I think Dr. Nadeem is not audible in Karachi. Is he? Can you hear?
Is this better? Can you hear me now? Asad Saab,
Yeah, that's
can you
better.
hear me? Can you hear me? Asad Saab, can you hear me? I guess not.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Good, okay. What I was saying, Asad Saab, was 73, 75 years, we've had 22 or 23 fund programs. We have succeeded in conning the fund on every program. We never achieved adjustment, and all the fund for years has laughed at us, has called us the first tranche country, but yet they are beholden to us. They will continue to give us aid because they also cannot let such a large country sink. So this game, it should be called the Pakistan game, and eventually all that happens is another fund program, and we'll get there soon. The question is that there is no willingness in this country to have any coherent adjustment program. Neither are we willing to talk about it. Even in an August gathering like this, we will not discuss the mega issue. We will only discuss details about whether this indirect tax or that indirect tax works. The fact is, what you should tell me now, you are the accountants, when is the next mini budget coming? Is it going to be in 3 months or 6 months? And in an environment where we had many, many budgets, where we have arbitrary taxation every few months, there is no horizon for investment. Anybody, all of you should be able to tell me that there is no way to value assets or price anything in this environment. With the result that when we turn around and say, oh my God, please invest, then we have to give a turf. Then we have to give this concession and that concession. With the result, we get caught up in a knot of taxes. And as Vakar adequately explained, exemption after exemption, subsidy after subsidy, then we remove them. And then as he said himself, that how credible is the removal of the subsidy. So the challenges facing us remain much the same. The search for a credible fiscal policy, the search for a growth-oriented fiscal policy, the search for credible strategies for gaining investment gains. We've got a 12% investment GDP ratio, which is abysmal. Our unemployment rate needs to be examined. PBS says it's 5, but then when we look at it readily in more detail, we find graduate unemployment is 34%. Ladies and gentlemen, today I can hire a PhD at 20,000 a month. I can hire an MPhil at roughly the same amount, or even 15,000 a month. My driver costs me 35,000. So you can tell what are the returns to education. We've got a mess on our hands, and all we do is sweep it under the carpet. Let's face it, we need radical structural change, and we are not willing to talk about it. We think balancing the books is enough. I'm sorry, we have 9.5 trillion of fiscal expenditures. But Waqar, you didn't tell us how many new agencies were formed in the last 3-4 years. Nea Pakistan Housing Society, 4 of them. RERA, 1. We've counted 134 regulatory agencies in Islamabad. They cost. They're not free of charge. Who's going to close down any of them? We've counted sludge, the cost of regulation. The cost of regulation in only 20 areas is 40% of GDP. This country needs a serious deregulation, a serious change in policy, and just merely patching up the kite is not going to fly the kite. Those of you who flew kites when you were young, you remember we used to chew on roti and put chapis on the kite. After a while, the kite got too heavy. This kite has got too heavy. It will not fly unless we do deep structural changes. Lastly, our problem is we are an over-politicized society. Everything is politics here. I'm glad the fund has made us pass the central bank independence law. Perhaps it's time the fund forced us also to pass a fiscal independence law so that politics should also remain out of finance. Then maybe this kite will fly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saab. Coming to Warmick Saab, we have a problem as far as inflation and currency devaluation is concerned. How do you think, considering these two major challenges, Pakistani economy can be brought into track?
To begin with, I would totally agree with Dr. Nadeem ul-Haq, what he said. And the answer to your question also lies in that until and unless we address the fault lines in the economy, we would be just scratching the surface if we are going to be talking about this tax or that tax or this measure or that measure. We have to address the fault lines. All the fault lines are identified. Yet year after year, as Dr. Nadeem says, we keep sweeping it under the carpet and keep on working out like a munshi in the budget, trying to balance the books, which numbers don't hold good at the end of the year. For example, there is a law, the Constitution of Pakistan says that the federal government cannot do expenditure beyond 4 months without approval of the parliament. But there's no restriction on the federal government for overspending. And every year we see billions of rupees overspent and then authorized post facto by the parliament through supplementary grants. Nobody talks about them. We find that the present fiasco or the thing that we are facing is a product of that we embarked on a high growth trajectory last year without bearing in mind that what it is going to do to our foreign reserves, the kind of pressure that's going to exert. Although time and again it's been shown to us that if we exceed a certain GDP growth rate, it brings our external account under pressure. So these are the things that basically we need to be talking about. We need to be defining and trying to address. After that, we will have to then see that what will happen to the exchange devaluation. And now, currency devaluation basically is to stop, to encourage industrialization. If you maintain an overvalued currency, we have seen it, that it discourages industrialization. It favors imports. But then that is a product, and that can only be addressed if we start producing for exports. We only export our surplus production. It's been identified. Yet we don't see any measures towards that in our industrial policy. We are still stuck in that groove of import substitution. We know that bulk of the raw material of our industries are imported, and that's why we have this pressure on our external account when we have a high growth rate. So these are the things. And coming to the taxation measure, I must use this opportunity. I've been attending these seminars or these post-budget conferences by ICAP. Never once have I seen any mention of a glaring omission in our tax structure, and that is that pensions are not taxed. The reality today is that a person's take home while he or she is in service is less than what the take home is when he or she retires and gets the pension. Our pension bill is projected at 530 billion total. Can you imagine what kind of tax we would be getting if they were not exempt from taxes? It is a classic case of the powerful giving themselves this gift of tax-free pensions. And mind you, pensions even for private companies are exempt from tax. Why have we never talked about it? I would like to see a recommendation from this institute that is primarily dealing with income tax. It's never come before. So my submission to you is exchange rate policy, interest rate policy, these are all policies to try and either provide monetary easing or contract the economy. Right now, the need is that we have to curtail the demand irrespective of the consequences because we just don't have those dollars. We can't afford it. So the depreciated currency and the high cost of money, we hope if it is supported on the fiscal side as well, will do the trick for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Vamik sir. Now we have certain questions from all three locations from the audience. Coming to Dr. Waqar, one of the questions is whether the government ever be able to make a balance between strengthen economy, revenue growth, and political growth. All three do not go hand in hand, and every government has struggled because of short term.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Zishan sir. Thank you, sir. I think the bottom line is the same. Whatever economic growth strategy has to be in place or was in place wasn't allowed time to, of course, sustain, due to which, of course, you don't have an economic structure which can really move forward, render you 7 to 8% of GDP growth over 20 years of time, which in turn leads to, of course, halving of poverty. That hasn't happened in this country, but that's what the experience from Far East is, basically, or China for that matter, you know. And in the absence of any certain medium-term growth strategy in place, what happens is what Dr. Nadeemul Haq was referring to, which is ad hocism in economic policy, and you're trying to give an economic vision from a short-term fiscal policy which is revised every year, and of course sometimes several times in a year, you know. So some people say that a solution to this, politicians tell us that a solution to this is the Charter of Economy probably. But then we also have the other class of politicians who say that no, economics is a political subject and you cannot have a Charter of Economy because all of them come from different economic ideologies. But there could be some consensus on minimum economic indicators, and we could bind compliance of that economic progress, those economic indicators through law, something which we try to do through fiscal responsibility and debt limitation law. We have now tried to strengthen it further, something which I advocated that we need to strictly adhere to PFM law, public finance management law, and over time one hopes that this fiscal discipline would result in space for public investment which could give some growth.
Sir, another question for you. Can there be a borrowing-free Pakistan? Is it sane to borrow and then give subsidy? With around 80% collection from indirect sources, is this budget Pakistan can sustain?
No, I think this is an important question, and I've already indicated that almost half of the budget is being financed through debt. So I think the numbers speak for themselves. Such a budget is certainly not sustainable. And while, yes, government, this one or the past one, can get away with it by saying that it wasn't the domestic factors, it was the external factors that really tore apart whatever budget estimates were there. But I think this is why responsible countries build fiscal buffers against these external food, fuel, price shocks, basically.
Coming to you, Asad sir. The question is, this government and the previous governments all are interested for enhancement of the tax base, but still they miss to tax agriculture sector into tax net. On this economic front, how much we trust on our GDP numbers until the reporting of such big sector is not reported. What are your thoughts on that?
So, as I understood, your question is about whether the agriculture sector should be taxed. Obviously, there is no question about all persons who earn income should be taxed. But then, you know, we need to appreciate that in this country, only very few sectors effectively pay tax, which is basically banking sector, telecom sector, public sector, large companies, you know, and multinationals. Other than that, the exporters not taxed. I think there was a time there when a comparison was made and it was determined that one company, ICI, I'm talking about 25, 30 years ago when ICI was not, at that time, it was still a multinational company. So ICI paid more taxes than the entire textile sector. And then subsequently, another analysis reflected that there is actually a negative tax in the textile sector. So you see, I mean, just look at the retailers regime, the fixed tax regime that we have just imposed. So it's not that people in agriculture, I mean, indirect tax is paid by everybody. So mostly, you know, income tax is also in our country, largely withholding tax. So yes, I think there is a huge problem. And as earlier speakers were saying, we need to address this systemic issue of, you know, improving our tax base. And for that, I think we need reforms in FDR, we need national tax policy, and a lot of reforms are needed. I would just, I think since time is short, let me just give you my view on the earlier point you also raised about, you know, what should be the way forward. Should I say that now, or will you?
Yes, sir, you can.
Okay. So you also raised whether Pakistan will ever be debt-free. I think no country is debt-free. And I don't think in this world we can imagine any reasonably successful economy or organization to achieve any objectives without debt. Debt is a reality. I don't know about the next world, but this world is not without debt. So as to the Pakistan's, problems, economic problems, and why we are where we are today, we have to address those problems. In my view, the biggest problem why we return to IMF every third year, which Dr. Nadeem was saying, the basic reason is that our government is the biggest drain on the country. Our public sector expenditure is perhaps one of the, the comparison is made within the region. If you compare Pakistan with Bangladesh, for instance, Bangladesh is now given as an example that it is one of the, second best economies in Asia. So what is the difference between Pakistan and Bangladesh? If you look at their budget, as far as tax to GDP ratio is concerned, we are the same. Probably Pakistan is slightly better. It is actually the expenditure to GDP ratio which creates the problem for Pakistan. Our expenditure overall, federal and provinces put together, is more than 20 or around 22% compared to Bangladesh 14 or 15%. So that's why Pakistan has been running a fiscal deficit, when you include the non-tax revenue also of 7 to 8%. And I'm also including by the way, Zubairi Saab was earlier referring to के हमारी जो बजट होती है और वो सप्लीमेंट उस पर कोई कंट्रोल नहीं है, पार्लियामेंट जो अप्रूव करती है और बाद में सप्लीमेंट्री बजट में आप कितना भी बढ़ा लें. I would even say that हमारा एक्चुअली एक्सपेंडिचर सप्लीमेंट्री बजट जो अप्रूव करती है पार्लियामेंट उससे भी ज्यादा होता है. इसलिए कि जो गवर्नमेंट जो गारंटीज देती है और जो जिसने बैंकरप्ट किया है गवर्नमेंट को और पब्लिक सेक्टर एसओईज जो हैं जिसका इस वक्त तकरीबन 5 ट्रिलियन के करीब डेट है, वो गवर्नमेंट के बजट में रिफ्लेक्ट नहीं होता, तो पार्लियामेंट उसको अप्रूव भी नहीं करती है बाय द वे, लेकिन गवर्नमेंट गारंटीज दे देती है. दैट अंडर द अकाउंट, आई थिंक अकाउंटेंट्स विल अंडरस्टैंड दैट इज एक्चुअल एक्सपेंडिचर, नॉट ए कंटिजेंट लायबिलिटी. आई एम सॉरी टू से इकोनॉमिस्ट ने उसको कंटिजेंट लायबिलिटी कर दिया है. इट इज एन एक्चुअल एक्सपेंडिचर. सो पाकिस्तान्स प्रॉब्लम इज that our public sector is the biggest problem. Our government expenditure is 22%, and we have been running fiscal deficit of more than 7-8% when you include that 8-9% for the last 30-40 years. So that creates the problem for the external sector. Then the external sector goes bankrupt, and we have to go back to the IMF. So the real reform which is required is we have to cut the size of the government. आप यकीन करें, ये जो हमारा डॉक्टर नदीम भी थे, डॉक्टर इशरत का जो ग्रुप था रिफॉर्म्स की हम जो बात कर रहे थे प्रीवियस गवर्नमेंट में, despite 18th amendment, the size of the federal government has actually increased. We have huge size of इतने सारे departments, divisions हैं. अब मुझे बताएं, the largest economy in the world, US, they have 13-14 ministers, cabinet है. हमारे यहाँ 50 ministers हैं, तो 50 ministries हैं, 50 divisions हैं, उनके attached departments हैं, फिर SOEs हैं, और ये सारा खर्चा दायरा है टैक्स पेयर्स के ऊपर आता है. अच्छा, इसी तरीके से then you have provincial governments, then you have local governments. In Bangladesh, you don't have provinces. So you see, the basic problem in this country is excessive government, which also reduces decision making. So we have excessive cost of government, excessive government which retards decision making, creates inefficiency for the entrepreneurship. Then we have excessive regulation that Dr. Nadeem talked about. Then we have the problem of, problematic litigation in this country. And then that is why we have very high tax rates. The largest, I think Pakistan's tax rates now with these current changes, 42%. I don't think any country is near us. If you look at even European Union and these Scandinavian countries used to have 25, 30, 35% tax rates. Now the corporate tax rates have gone down to 20%. And in fact, they had to do an accord because Ireland wanted to bring it down to 10% or so. So the G20 countries fixed that you can't have lesser than 15%. So these countries are competing to reduce their tax rate to attract capital. Because capital is like water. It finds its own place. The FDI and capital will go where the tax rates are the lowest. So who is going to come to the country where you have 42% tax rate? So if we want to improve this country, I think we need to do 3, 4, 5 things. We need to seriously cut size of the government. We need to cut the regulations. We need to cut the tax rates. We need to learn to reduce the litigation, cut the litigation.
Great.
So without these, I think Pakistan will continue to, I think, move from one IMF program to the other. Thank you.
Thank you, Asad. Thank you, sir. Dr. Nadeem, sir, I have one question for you. Pakistan has one of the lowest savings to GDP ratio in South Asia and certainly the world. Withdrawal of tax rebates on investment in mutual funds and voluntary pension schemes for individuals will further discourage savings. Your comments, please.
देखिए जी, पाकिस्तान में savings rate is not low at all. पाकिस्तान में savings rate is fine. Where savings rates are low, people get poorer. Pakistan में wealth creation is good. Wherever I go, I see people growing into the middle class. Poverty has declined, even though the World Bank wants poverty to increase because its mandate is to increase poverty. तो वर्ल्ड बैंक को ना देखा करें, वो डॉलर डे कभी $5 करते, कभी 15, कभी 20, कभी 50. तो वर्ल्ड बैंक के तो मैंडेट ही पॉवर्टी इंक्रीज करना, डिक्रीज करना नहीं, तो वो तो इंक्रीज करते रहते हैं. बट हमारी पॉवर्टी एक्चुअली हैज फॉलन एंड क्वाइट फ्रैंकली मिडिल क्लास हैज ग्रोन. Duran Ayab did a nice show that. The question really here is, please tell me, where do I save? I'll tell you a personal story. I just made the mistake of selling a plot that I bought 34 years ago. That I bought. The story is very interesting. I bought it in a housing scheme which went bankrupt. My money was stolen by the gentleman went overseas. Okay? Then later on, some miracle happened, and DHA took over the housing scheme and said, we'll give you 10 cents on the dollar. We said, fair enough, we'll take 10 cents on the dollar. So then we meandered along for another 20 years, and then finally I said, why, what the hell is happening? I sold the plot. Guess what happened? I had no black money. I said, I'll sell the plot. Buyer came to me, who incidentally was an accountant. Said to me, I'll give you half the money in white, half in black. An accountant. And he said, you don't know how to deal with it? I said, I don't. He said, well, you should deal with me. I'll tell you how to deal with it. This year I'm going to go to him for my tax. Then half the money that came to me in cash, because the DC rate. Now we at PIDE keep asking, why the hell do we have a DC rate? Can anybody explain to me why we have a DC rate? It's the most stupid thing in the world, because the government itself asked for a black money. We have an FPR rate. What the hell do we have an FPR rate? Abdullah Sahab baithe. Abdullah Sahab, what does FPR know about property values? So, we have a DC rate, FPR rate. So I got the money in cash. I didn't want the money in cash. Guess what? A broker came along to me and said, I'll give you 2 lakh rupees to convert your money into white. So guess what? He gave me a pay order, so I made it white. Now I put the whole amount in the bank, and I have a sales receipt of the legitimate transaction. Does FPR care? No. The accountant is home with my money and everything. FPR doesn't care. We create all the problems for ourselves. So you tell me, the money that I got now is 25% devalued. This is the story of savings in Pakistan. So, a good friend of mine who's also an economist, very well known, etc., I won't take his name, tells me every day, you're the bloody fool. Why didn't you convert into dollars? Why didn't you follow your own theory? And now I've learned my lesson. I'm looking for dollars. So if you have dollars, let me know. The problem is, let's look... Oh, sorry, I should add a problem. I thought I'd go to the stock market because all you guys tell me stock market is... Went to the stock market and guess what? I lost 25% more. So ladies and gentlemen, tell me, what does a saver do in Pakistan? Now that I've bought real estate, the government has said, I'll tax you more. The reason savings rate is low in this country is because we don't want savings in the official sector. Savings only happen in the informal sector. You have mandated that through your tax laws. A person is a fool to invest in the formal sector. So please go to the informal sector. And the best thing in the world, my advice to everybody, $1 million advice, take your money overseas. This country, even if you invest in real estate, we've checked on that, 70% of the housing societies in Islamabad are totally illegal. Many of them don't even have land. Your net return, your risk-adjusted return in real estate is very low. It's only the few insider traders who make a lot of money. Same thing on stock exchange. You know that very well. All of you know that. The insiders make money, the outsiders lose money. So please, savings rate in Pakistan is not low. It's the official system. As Asad Saab said, the government, and I might add, Asad Saab, We've calculated the footprint of the government in Pakistan. In fact, Waqar did it when we were in the planning commission too. Waqar, what was the footprint of the government when you calculated it?
Yes, it was 69%.
And now I think it's more. So when the government controls 70, 80% of resources and regulates the rest, where the hell should people go but run for cover? Sorry, I might add, in the old days, our grandfathers, grandmothers, etc., used to bury gold under the vault, under the bed, sorry, and also wear it on their selves. We are heading towards that direction, so the only savings we'll have is gold on us and under the bed, because official sector, anything that you put in there will be taxed.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saab. I'll be bouncing off last question from the audience to Vamik Saab. The budget contains share of foreign loans as part of resources and loan markup payments on expenditure side. What is the US dollar PKR rate government has used to ascertain both these figures, as it will have great impact on the budget deficit? Your thoughts on that?
From what I know, in the budget, they have valued the dollar at rupees 183 for the purposes of the budgetary numbers, which is absolutely an absurd figure, considering what the value it is. So, that's all I can say, because otherwise it's so unpredictable. What will it be in the future? And is that the question, right?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Thank you, Vamik sir. Thank you, dear panelists. Dear all panelists. Over to you, Anil.
Thank you very much, Dishant.